Okay, welcome back everybody from the lunch, whether you had lunch there at home watching or lunch here in Brussels. Welcome back either way. My name is Dave Keating. I'm a journalist based here in Brussels covering energy issues. I'm going to be walking us through this next panel, which is on energy efficiency and savings, a strategic autonomy imperative for a currently energy-dependent continent. This is an area I've been working on for a long time, and I've never seen it get so much public attention as it is at the moment because of the very, very imperative strategic goal of reducing Russian energy imports and, in general, reducing the EU's reliance on fossil fuels. We know that the easiest way to do that without building any new infrastructure is to actually just save energy. The cheapest energy is the energy you don't use. But of course, we know historically this has been a hard issue to really capture the public's imagination on. There have been numerous EU targets set in the past that have not been met, most notably the 2020 target. We know that national governments in the EU haven't exactly treated this as a priority over the past decade, but we are seeing a shift here. And there's been a lot of discussion over the past weeks about the real potential of energy efficiency. We know just simple things like insulation, maybe more complex things like heat pumps, or simple behavioral changes that we keep hearing about in terms of things that citizens can do if they want to feel some agency in the current Ukraine crisis. As they're looking on, they want to do something, and one very simple thing they can do is just turn off the lights, turn down the heating, turn off the air conditioning. But of course, we know that there are more complex tools in the energy efficiency tool belt, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm joined by an excellent panel of experts here with us today in this very comfy side room that we're in with these wonderful chairs. So let me introduce them now. We have Paula Pinho, Director of the Unit Just Transition, Consumers, Energy Efficiency and Innovation at the European Commission's Energy Department. We have Niels Fuglsang, a Danish center-left MEP who sits on the Parliament's Energy Committee and is the rapporteur on the energy efficiency file. We have Paul Cartuils, Executive Director of French Industrial Group Bouygues Europe and President of the construction technology platform ECTP. We have Arianna Vitali Rossini, Secretary General of the Coalition for Energy Savings. And we have Oliver Rampf, Executive Director of the Buildings Performance Institute Europe. Paula, let me start with a question for you. We know that the Commission is revisiting the Energy Efficiency Directive. I alluded a bit to the previous experience with the 2020 target and the previous iterations of the directive. So what were the main objectives of the Commission in its proposal to revise the EED?
Thank you, Dave, and good being with you here today. As a European Council, a very important one is ongoing and discussing also energy efficiency. Now, it started a long time ago with energy efficiency. You mentioned the 2020 targets, but last year, as part of the so-called Fit for 55 package, the Commission had put forward a proposal on revising the Energy Efficiency Directive. Why? Because we said if we are serious about decarbonization of the energy system, if we're serious about our energy and climate targets by 2030, climate neutrality in Europe by 2050, energy efficiency is absolutely key. We cannot leave it aside, and we cannot meet these ambitions without energy efficiency. Therefore, the Commission proposed a combination of tools. We said, on the one hand, we need to increase the overall EU target. We need to make it very clear that it's binding, because so far there had been some margins for interpretation. Is it really binding on all of us? Yes, it is binding. Let's make it very explicit. And a combination with not just targets, but measures, because targets are nice, but it's the measures which will be delivering. So we strengthened a number of measures. Take, for instance, the audit obligations that so far were requested only on big-sized companies. We said it makes sense for all types of companies, big or small. These audits which will look at your energy efficiency within a company, make absolute sense, and that you then implement the recommendations in order to make the most of energy efficiency in a company should be strengthened. We looked, for instance, into the potential of data centers, which we know are more and more a source of intensity of energy, of consumption of energy that we need to tackle, and we need to make it more energy efficient. We looked at increasing the savings within member states, within the public authorities, where we know there is a huge potential unseized in the traffic lights, in the social housing, in the hospitals, in the public schools. So let's look at how we can increase that. So we combined really targets and measures. Now, what happened in the meantime? We came back from our summer holiday last year and started seeing prices increasing, energy prices increasing significantly. And then, as not expected, on top of it, a war in Ukraine. The two combined mean, and you mentioned already, the need to decarbonize. One hand, that was the original objective, but now it's really the need to accelerate our independence of imports of fossil fuels, from Russia, of course, in particular. Now, energy efficiency is a clear response on how to tackle that. Because if you look at it, it's not just about decarbonization. If you look at energy efficiency, it brings in the elements of energy security, because the less you need to import fossil fuels, the more energy secure you are. It brings benefits in terms of health, in terms of air quality. And of course, with these high energy prices, there's also a question of the cost efficiency of energy efficiency. So all of a sudden, what we were being told, these targets are maybe too high and are not cost efficient. With the current prices as we see them for energy, energy efficiency becomes much more cost efficient. So we said we need to revisit it. And we've been working, and MEP Vogelsang is doing an excellent work and also looking into those aspects and trying to also push into that direction. And that's why, as part of the Repower EU plan that we put forward last week, clearly we said we need to also reassess the target, and there is a case for increasing it from the proposed 9% to the 13%.
Thanks a lot. Yes, let's turn to Niels, because you're obviously shepherding this through the European Parliament. We know that this is all going to cooperate with the EU's climate goals, which are set for 2030 and for 2050, 55% by 2030, net zero by 2050. Can you explain how exactly a revision of the Energy Efficiency Directive would contribute to those decarbonization goals?
Well, as you say, Dave, we need to reach at least 55% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And if we ask and then we need to become completely climate neutral in 2050. And if you ask the International Energy Agency how we're going to reach that, it's of course both a matter of increasing, expanding renewables, but it's also a matter, and they say that it's also a matter of increasing energy efficiency. And they say, the International Energy Agency, that 44% of the reductions will actually come from increasing energy efficiency. So, if all the electricity, if all the energy was green today, you could argue that we didn't need energy efficiency so much because it would not harm the environment to produce energy. But obviously, all the energy is not clean today. It's a lot of it is fossil-based, unfortunately. So, reducing the energy consumption will contribute to reducing CO2 emissions. And in the case that we have much more electricity, we have much more wind turbines and solar power, which we hopefully will have the coming years, I think we still need to increase energy efficiency, because our grids, our electricity grids, will become overused we will need so many grids and so strong grids if we don't also at the same time try to decrease our energy consumption a little bit. So I think in a lot of ways energy efficiency can contribute to mitigating climate change. And I think in relation to what Paula mentioned with the energy prices and the situation in Ukraine, I think we actually face 3 crises today. We know the climate crisis, but we also have an energy crisis today with the soaring prices, and we have a security crisis, which is Putin's aggression against Ukraine. And I think energy efficiency is a response to all those 3 crises. Obviously, the climate crisis, the greenest energy is the energy you don't use. The energy crisis, well, if we can save energy, we can also save the money that we use for paying for the energy. And lastly, the security crisis, well, we pay for Putin's war right now when we import his energy. Actually, we pay much more. I mean, we try to help Ukraine with funds, but we pay much more to Russia with paying for Putin's energy. And actually, Putin, with the high energy prices, the government in Russia just said that they expect increased revenues from sales of oil and gas. So I think it's the right decision that the European Council has made to make an embargo. And also for that reason, if we are to make an embargo, which it seems that we are, and I applaud that, we need to save our energy to have a society that still works here.
Indeed, yeah, the embargo just increases the need for energy efficiency measures. Paul, let's turn to you next. You're working in the construction sector, which is a very relevant sector for this topic, right? So how is efficiency being dealt with in the construction sector?
Thank you. First of all, good afternoon to all of you in your comfortable chairs there. It's quite impressive. It looks like a movie theater. I think it's quite unusual. And thanks, hello to those online also. Yes, first of all, what I'd like to say is that what we've heard now from the 2 former speakers, we are enforcing it. We are doing it, actually. That's our job, is to apply all the rules that have been decided by the European institutions. And we fully subscribe to everything that is being done there. We need this regulatory pressure and environment to do things. Also, to make a little bit of history about this energy efficiency, there was another crisis back in 2008, if some people remember it, because the crisis follow up. And in 2010 already, the Commission said, we need a recovery plan, so the expression existed already there. Mm-hmm. And out of the 3 subjects that they decided to push, one of the 3 was energy efficiency in buildings. So just to tell you that this subject has been seen as a solution, not only for the climate energy autonomy, but also for job creation, reactivation of the economy. So it's been a long time that we think about it. I would say that energy efficiency is really the backbone, in a way, of the construction sector. Second thing I'd like to say also, since this morning we talk about energy. And I'd like to tell you that I like also to talk about what happens when everything is switched off in the buildings and in the streets. So basically, I would say that the first criteria is when nothing is on, when I have no energy, how much my building has natural light coming in it, natural ventilation coming in it, how cold or warm or cool or warm it can be without turning anything on, is to show you that the very beginning in the cycle of construction is to think of urban planning, architecture. Everything has to be optimized already at that level before you turn on anything. I think it's the first important thing to do. The second thing that I did not hear that much this morning, which is really important, is look at the life cycle of the building. Very often we talk mainly about the operating phase of the building, but we need to know how was the construction phase, how did we produce the material for the construction. At the same time, if we dismantle the buildings afterwards, we need to look at the whole life cycle, because energy will be used at all those moments. CO2 can eventually be emitted at all those moments. So this life cycle concept is really important to look at. Another dimension which is very important for the construction sector is the digital technologies, the digital opportunities that we're having more and more. They really help a lot for energy efficiency. Not only for the more popular smart meters that people know, but also for the conception of buildings. There is this concept of building information modeling that most of you know also, which allows to have a virtual image of the building and work on it from the very beginning, the construction phase, the operating phase, exchange with all the parties working on the building. not only it allows to save energy, but also to save materials. You can really save a lot of materials by working on this virtual building. So you see, with the present technologies, we can revolutionize completely the building construction. We talk a lot about buildings, but there's also infrastructure, and in particular mobility. We also have to say a word on this. We can work on energy efficiency also thanks to the way we manage infrastructure, not only for the mobility, but also for the maintenance of the infrastructure. Maintenance of roads, for instance, is something that is not talked about as much as we could. It's very important because roads that are not in good condition, the traffic jams, all the complications that you can imagine, bridges that are closed, so it's completely complicated. And when you want to maintain the road also, you can either block the road for months or have systems where you can really, in an energy efficient way and resource efficient way, retrofit the road also. So there is a lot of energy efficient solutions for both buildings and infrastructure that are really important, and in which the digital solutions have an extremely big importance. And I insist we have to look at the life cycle for not only the energy production but the energy consumption. In the beginning you said very quickly, yes, there was also the behavior. It's very important. The behavior we know about it, but we really have to speak a lot about the behavior, because we have built sometimes buildings that were supposed to be positive energy, fantastic. If the people inside say this is too cold, this is too warm, this is too dark, it's finished. So the connection between the users and the buildings and the infrastructure is really important. Even if people know it, it's not necessarily practiced. So maybe I'm too long, so we'll stop here. But definitely energy efficiency is the backbone for the construction, and we're happy to contribute to the fact that we need to be more autonomous in terms of energy.
It's a really interesting point you make about road maintenance even being a factor in energy efficiency, because of course it affects how much people are driving and then how much they're accelerating, this type of thing. It's probably not the first thing most people would think of with energy efficiency, but there's lots of areas like that that actually make a big effect. Ariana, Paul mentioned that this has been an area of focus for policymakers for a long time, and there have been attempts over the past 15, 20 years to try to get a handle on this. So as you guys have been observing all of these different policies, what policies do you think have worked well so far, both at EU and national level, and what policies have worked less well?
Thank you for the questions, and hello everyone in the room and online. This question is very interesting, and I think it's particularly important nowadays to understand what are the policies that have worked, because those are the ones that will need to be strengthened to achieve the REPowerEU objective, but also to understand the ones that will need to be tweaked and reinforced because so far has not delivered. I mean, previous speakers have already focused on the Energy Efficiency Directive, but maybe also in that case, as this is really the key framework directive, I'm gonna focus on one instrument that has been really key to deliver the energy savings, which is the energy savings obligation under the Energy Efficiency Directive. This article has been a key delivery tool to ensure, for example, that savings are delivered at the EU level and at national level. According to the Commission own analysis, it has delivered half of the savings of the 2020 target, and it will be a crucial instrumental tool to deliver the higher targets. Through energy savings obligations, so the obligation of member states to save energy at consumers, at final customers every year, it has allowed to ensure that there are measures delivered in all sectors, from buildings to transport to industry, but also it has ensured that member states, while having an objective, a strict objective to be met, that they could choose the flexibility they wanted to achieve it. So, for example, they could put in place an energy efficiency obligation scheme, as it's the case in many member states, or they could choose to achieve the same objective through taxation measures, through financing schemes, through energy efficiency programs. And I think that has been the beauty of the instruments, that has been strong enough and clear enough to deliver a quantifiable amount of savings, but has left flexibility. So in the recast of the ED as we see now, I mean, of course, we welcome the Commission proposal to increase it further, this target to 1.5%, but we're even more happy to see that the rapporteur has proposed an increase to 2%, and I guess also in the EU Safe Plan, it's clear, there is a clear invitation from the Commission to co-legislator to consider an annual higher target in that event. And for what it hasn't worked, I mean, there are things that hasn't worked, I mean, and I could make some example, but I think the original scene of the energy efficiency framework has been, as already mentioned by Paula, the weak governance framework for the energy efficiency target, both for 2020 and still for 2030. So I think we are also happy to see a binding EU target proposed by the Commission and also supported by the rapporteur, but of course this needs to be really accompanied also by binding national contributions that are based on a clear formula to effort share the efforts among member states, because this is the way in which energy efficiency will not be deprioritized, and actually businesses and investors will have a clear long-term framework that will allow them to invest and come up with new solutions and implementing them on the ground. So for us, that's this weak governance is something that really needs to be changed with the Fit for 55 package and the recast of the ED.
Yeah, I suppose that weak governance is the thing at the very top, which then translated into bad or no policy below when it comes to national implementation and regional implementation. Oliver, Ariana mentioned the need for these savings to be quantifiable. How do you think we can improve the measurement and the assessment of buildings' energy performance so that we know what's working, what's not working, and so that we can actually measure whether we're making any progress?
Thanks. Well, I think we need to take one step back. We need to ask the question, why do we actually want to measure something? Yes, we want to measure progress, but I think we also want to identify opportunities for energy savings. And that's where we currently do not have enough knowledge. Last week, we had the publication of the Repower EU plan. It's very interesting when you read through the detailed documents, the annex documents. There are 3 maps which describe the potential for renewable energy in Europe, actually on a regional basis. You have that for onshore wind power, for offshore wind power, and for solar power. You don't have that for energy efficiency potential in buildings. Something like that doesn't exist because we do not know enough about the detailed saving potential. Yes, we can renovate a building and then we can measure before and afterwards. Wonderful. But we do not have the opportunity at the moment for companies, for construction companies, to offer a comprehensive renovation service based on an analysis which defines the opportunity. And that's a big dilemma. In Europe, we have the system of energy performance certificates, which classify buildings according to their efficiency. But that's only done when a building is sold or when an apartment is rented or a house is rented. So it's not done for all buildings all the time. At the same time, each and every building is supplied with energy. So the utility which is powering a house, an apartment, has the data. But that's commercially owned data. It's not public data, and it's not made available to policymakers either. So that's a big dilemma which we need to address. Theoretically, we have all the information at hand, but it's well hidden. And that prevents companies from developing a broader, comprehensive renovation service business model. And because we do not have this service offering, people are not investing as much as they could, or even as they would want to, into renovation. So we really need to tweak a number of levers, pull a number of levers to launch this renovation service market. And then we will have the renovation wave, which was announced by the European Commission actually well before the Ukraine war as part of the European Green Deal. That's essential, that we stimulate that energy efficiency market, and then we have a justified reason for asking for more data from those who have the data.
So I have a couple of questions for the panelists, and I'd love to get some questions from you guys here in the room and also watching online. So if you have questions, you can put them into Slido. The hashtag is EnerGreenDeal. Also, if you want to tweet about what we're saying on Twitter, same hashtag, EnerGreenDeal. Send me your questions, and I'll see them here, and I'll ask them to the panelists. Paula, I wanted to ask about one thing that's changed since the last iteration of the Energy Efficiency Directive, and that's digital tools, which is something that's always changing. And we know that from the very first iteration of the EED until now, there have been big technological changes. There's lots of new technologies available, but the implementation and the availability is not as high as we'd like it to be. I know I've never even seen a smart meter in anyone's house. And I just bought a house last year that's very nice energy efficiency rating, no smart meter. So what can we do to increase this availability of digital tools? And how important do you think these new digital tools, like smart meters, but also other tools, how important are those going to be in increasing energy efficiency in the EU?
Paul, you have some work to do here. And finding well, it starts with that. It starts with that, the challenge of the digitalization of the whole energy system, in the whole supply chain, from generation to distribution to storage to the use at your home. And we really need to roll it out, but for that, citizens also need to understand where it comes in and how it can be of help. And it can be of immense help for energy efficiency. It can really increase the possibility to seize the real potential of energy efficiency. And of course, the most common referred example is the smart meter, because it's the one that you and I, as consumers, can use it to manage efficiently the energy consumption at our homes. But as said, it is much, much broader than that. It's not by coincidence that we are saying now that we're really facing a double transition. It's the energy transition, but it's also the twin transition. And the more we'll make out of the potential of digitalization within the energy system, the more it can be reflected in efficiency of the system, in energy efficiency, and really bringing down the consumption of energy at all levels. As said, starting in the production of energy to the final consumption of energy. And you have the sensors at home, which can start telling you when actually a certain device should get in operation, when not, when is the best moment. But also from the whole management of the system. If you start digitalizing between production and distribution, and for instance, now there are so many cars, electric cars, which are parked, which can actually feed into the electricity grid, not just being recharged, but in the moment there's a lot of consumption going on. So let's use cars which have been charged, which are electric, and can now feed into the system. So it's a whole array of options that need to be rolled out at all the stages. And we are now, as we speak, preparing what we call the digitalization of the energy action plan. We'll come out with it in September probably. And the idea is really to map all the areas in all the supply chain where digitalization can play a role, and how best to go about it. And there are, between interoperability of devices, for instance, is an issue. So really many areas where we're digging deep, and some we are delivering already as we speak with legislative action, implementing legislation. Others will come as we go, but I'd like to already draw attention for a future debate, which is really also important having, is on all the potential of the digitalization in the energy system.
Paul, what do you think you need from policymakers to really increase the uptake here of these digital tools? And not just smart meters, like Paul was saying, but the whole array of digital tools that are available in the construction sector.
In fact, we are already using quite a lot of them. case, and it's not because we're a big company, because we should not oppose big companies to small companies, because we do work together all the time. So we are also a passage to bring knowledge to digital technologies for smaller companies. That's important. What we need is probably not specifically more legislation on this, but make sure in this specific moment that the incredible amount of legislation that is coming out is as readable as possible, as practical as possible, rather than really more subjects. I mean, there is a lot is on the table already, so I'm not going to ask for more. Just what I would like to know is that make sure that between the dialogue between the Commission, the Parliament and the Council, they keep in mind that it's a situation where we have to be also efficient in terms of work, not only in terms of energy. And so we need to have a legislative framework which is as agile as possible, as practical as possible. And it is important that you keep in mind who is going to read and utilize those documents, because we know the climate crisis and energy crisis are really big. Nobody is against that. But we feel a very strong regulatory pressure for the moment in terms of quantity. So rather than more, I would say really more pragmatic.
And more flexible.
More flexible and more pragmatic, which is really important.
I suppose in this area, since technology is always changing, and any new directive is probably going to be out of date in terms of technology the minute it goes into the official journal, I guess. So that flexibility is quite important. Niels, Paul says he doesn't necessarily need new regulation. Do you want new regulation anyway in order to increase the uptake of digital tools?
Well, yes, I think we need regulation, but I agree with Paul that it should be flexible. I mean, I think the EU has a role of setting some high targets that are legally binding, that member states need to live up to. But then if we can leave much of the initiative, many of the measures to the member states to figure out how do they want to do it, to the industry to figure out how it's going to happen, I think we should do that. That's a bottom-up approach, and I think so the EU should be careful in being too specific on what to do, because a lot of the ideas, most of the ideas probably will come from the industry, from the industry trying to find new solutions. I still think we need new regulation. Sometimes I'm being asked by other politicians or industry itself that, you know, if energy efficiency is so rational, you know, if we can save money by increasing energy efficiency, why do you even regulate? Because then we will do it ourselves. You know, it makes economic sense, and we have a lot of analysis showing that it makes economic sense for industry, for governments to increase energy efficiency, but they don't do it in a sufficient scale. And I think that's an interesting question. Why is it not happening sufficiently? We have, well, Stefan Scheuer was just here, and they made analysis of that it actually, we can increase the energy efficiency target and still do it so it makes economically sense, because we will save money if we don't, if we save energy. But I think my answer to this is that maybe people are, and industry and politicians are not as rational as we thought they were. When I went to university, I learned about rational choice theories, about how all kinds of actors make analysis and act in a rational way. But I think it's highly exaggerated how rational we are. And so I think we need, as legislators, to push that rationality. It probably exists. It just needs to be pushed a little bit via regulation.
Or added incentive. Yeah. Oliver, you were mentioning that there is a good amount of data already that's there for analysis. How helpful would it be in terms of having more digital tools to generate more data for analysis of buildings' performance?
Well, I think it makes a lot of sense to really monitor energy consumption in buildings. But I think we should not expect too much from the individual consumer, that they continuously want to monitor their energy consumption at home and regulate a little bit here and there. I think what we need is an interactive system where buildings are a central hub of the energy system, where buildings provide energy storage capacities, both for thermal energy but also for electric energy, and where they really react and interact with the electricity grid, sometimes feeding in energy, sometimes storing energy, depending on the availability also of renewable energy. And I think if we basically turn the building stock of today, which in the end, to put it very simple, consists of relatively stupid boxes, into smart boxes which really interact with the energy system, we will have a much more resilient and a cleaner and a much more flexible energy system, which will enable a much faster renewable energy growth. And of course, digitalization is the essential tool to achieve that, but it's not a purpose in itself. It's there to serve and achieve exactly those goals which I just described.
Ariana, moving on to the regulatory topic that Paul was just talking about. Of course, we hear this argument a lot that you want to get the regulatory balance right. And especially in the area of digital and innovation, there's always the risk that overregulation is going to stifle innovation. How do you think we get the balance right between regulation delivering results, which we want to see on energy efficiency, and the risk that too much regulation can stifle the innovation that we need to develop new digital tools?
I think here, in my perspective, is not just a question of it is too much regulation, is not enough regulation, but it's really a question of having the good regulation that is fit for purpose to deliver on certain objectives, allowing, of course, some flexibility at the national level on how this is happening. I mean, an example, a clear example for me is the revision of the Energy Efficiency Directive. It was created in 2012 and it has been already revised twice, 2018 and now undergoing this revision. So I think what is missing is to have a regulation that is future-proof, in order that the legal framework that we agree as European Union remains stable enough and give the right signals. So before the Energy Efficiency Directive was not climate proof because was not in line with the Paris Agreement, so we had to rechange it with the Clean Energy Package. Now we have a Fit for 55 coming up from climate neutrality objectives. We are in a situation now with there is an energy security challenge that is really creating problems from Europe. So I think the point now is not asking, do we need more regulation, but we need to have a regulation that is adopted that, of course, it cannot predict everything that will happens in the next years, but we know that this has to solve an energy security challenge, it has to solve a climate challenge, and that's why I think I would say more from a council perspective, we need to integrate these future challenges and make the right decision at this time, because we cannot expect to revise legislation again in 5 years. That will be problematic for businesses. It will also be problematic for implementers at the national level. So I think here the question is really, let's make it right with the high-level objectives that we know are needed for the climate and energy security crisis, and then let's go to implementation in a serious way and avoid being in a cycle of legislative revisions again in 5 years from now.
Paula, we have a separate area of EU policy, which is circular economy, which is more general, more pertaining to environmental issues, certainly pertains to climate issues as well. But it's all about not wasting, having a circular use of products and energy, and so obviously fits into the energy efficiency goals. I wanted to ask you, how does the Commission view the intersection of the EED and the circular economy strategy, particularly with the goals of the parts of the circular economy strategy that are purely environmental? How does that intersect with the energy efficiency goals?
It's clearly, well, both should really go hand in hand, energy efficiency and circularity, in the sense that we need, well, first and foremost, also to more and more have products and consume products in a way which is circular at all its stages, between the raw materials that will go into a certain product to its recyclability, the possibility of getting products which will not be thrown away only because one part is destroyed. So it clearly goes hand in hand, because the more circular our economy will be, again, the more efficiency and the more energy efficiency we can obtain from it. And you're starting to see it. And here I would challenge a bit what Ariana was saying, because there's also time for given regulatory changes. And until some years ago, circularity was not in people's minds. You could not get ahead with it. And there had been attempts also by the Commission, and it wasn't the right time. Now we've just put forward a sustainable products initiative, which is based on the eco-design, which for all products, the vacuum cleaners, the dishwashers, the tumble dryers, where we were already foreseeing minimum energy efficiency requirements. But we were looking at it just from an energy point of view, energy efficiency point of view. And now the idea is to build on that and bring in the circularity elements, and really so as to cover the whole life cycle of a given product. So I think now we are at a stage in also in society where we are ready to go this additional step into circularity and really start having more and more products where we can ensure circularity, and where also citizens are ready to embrace it, and for whom it becomes more important not just to replace one product by a new one, but really to ensure that, well, I'd rather have it for a longer time and be able to have recyclability, circularity. So I think now we can seize that moment of really bringing together both.
Niels, how do you envision the intersection between the circular economy strategy and the EED?
So I think there are a couple of concrete things, critically important things in the EED that build on the principle of circularity when it comes to reusing heat from data centers, for example, from data centers and industry. I think the EED, the Energy Efficiency Directive, has a number of provisions where we say, and I've proposed to strengthen those, where we say, data centers, when you make a data center, you have to make the analysis of how can we use the excess heat, how can it be coupled to the heating net, if there is such a heating net, if there's district heating in the area. And how can it be coupled, and what are the economic consequences of doing or not doing it? We have provisions saying that in order for a district heating net to be considered energy efficient, it has to include a certain amount of waste heat, either renewable based heat or waste heat. So I think there are some concrete provisions where we really have the opportunity with this directive to make sure that heat is not wasted, that we use the excess heat from industry, data centers and other sources into the district heating net. And also, in order to do that, then I think we need more district heating. And I think we also have provisions in the Energy Efficiency Directive that push district heating because we need that to use the excess heat. So I think there are some concrete things that we need to do in the Energy Efficiency Directive. The second thing is then, I think we need a mentality change, which is underway as we speak, that our economy should not just be based on buying stuff and throwing it out. And consumers and people, I think, are changing their approach these years, but perhaps also these months, actually, to having recycling more and putting value in that idea of not just buying and wasting, but reusing, recycling, and so on. I remember, I think it was George W. Bush who said that high energy consumption or high energy intensity is part of the American culture, some quote like that. And I think that would be a no-go to say today, hopefully, because I think things have changed. I remember our old finance minister in Denmark said that he had this crazy quote where he said that when he drove away from his big house and to work in the parliament, he loved to just leave the light on and leave the heat on, because then when he returned, he didn't have to turn on the heat and turn on the light, because he really enjoyed, and he could afford it, so he didn't care about it. That was a crazy quote already back then, but I think that is really the mentality that we need to get away from, and I think we are also getting away from it with this war situation. I think that has been a game changer also for many people.
I think that would be a no-go thing to say in Europe. I have to say, as an American, I'm not so confident it is yet a no-go thing to say in America. Americans
Do you think things are changing there?
I don't, no, but that's another topic.
Then we have to take the lead here.
Even from a finance minister, because we have to know.
Depends on what state, maybe. Yeah. But Paul, on this same topic of the circular economy strategy, from the construction sector, what do you think should be the intersection between energy efficiency and particularly the circular economy's environmental targets?
Just one comment on the exchange before on America. Can you imagine Las Vegas switched off? So, basically, also on circular economy, I would like to widen the subject a little bit more, because we've talked about the energy issues, the connection with circular economy, but there is legislation that is a bit slightly older than Fit for 55 and Repower, which is the regulation on the framework for sustainable investment. So the idea is the Commission wants to orientate all the investment towards economic activities that are good for the climate and good for the environment. And in that case, energy efficiency is only part of the climate change mitigation dimension, let's say, CO2 emissions and others. But there's also an objective on climate change adaptation, which is really important. And on the other side, you have the environmental objectives, of which circular economy is one. There's circular economy there. There is also the water management, the pollution control, and the biodiversity. So right now, we are trying to solve this issue of how our economic activity fits into the 2 climatic objectives and the 4 environmental objectives. Circular economy in particular is essential. We've been working on this for years, because the construction sector is pointed at all the time for consuming too much energy, making too much waste, etc. So we have not really waited for regulation to make sure we can work on our waste to the maximum. It's really essential. For us, a building is becoming, if I could say, a bank of materials. So we will not demolish anymore. We'll deconstruct. We'll reuse. So it is absolutely important. And the present global situation, where for the moment we have a problem with availability of certain construction materials, make it even more urgent to also take care in parallel energy efficiency issues and materials issues. It's just, it has to be naturally taken together.
Ariana, a question for you. I know you guys have talked about this concept of the energy efficiency first principle. Tell us a little bit, what does that mean and how would it be applied in practice, particularly legislatively?
Well, yeah, thanks for the question. So the energy efficiency first principle, we are talking about it as coalition, but of course it's now a well-recognized principle in EU law, and also the Commission, its proposal, it's including a legal basis for the energy efficiency first principle in the Energy Efficiency Directive. But on your question, what does it mean in practice and how it should be applied? I think from my perspective, energy efficiency first does not mean necessarily that you need always and in all cases to implement energy efficiency measures first. It just means basically to give a fair chance to demand-side measures to compete with supply-side ones, because that's not a situation that we are seeing in the practice. It basically means to always assess whether demand-side measures, energy efficiency measures are more cost-effective, can deliver more benefits than a supply side measure. So, and then if this is the case, to implement it that in first place. So a really practical case, if we take into account, for example, infrastructure planning, would be before thinking to construct a new gas grid, a new pipeline, a new LNG terminal, it would be necessary to see whether inefficient and old buildings can be renovated first, so to reduce the energy consumption of the buildings before thinking to new supply measures to bring energy to those buildings, an energy that will be wasted anyway because those buildings are leaking. So I think in the context of the objectives of the Repower EU plan to phase out fossil fuel imports from Russia as soon as possible, the energy efficiency first principle really becomes important, and it has a practical implications and a practical application, which is really trying to save energy in the building sectors, in the transport sector, and in other sectors to ensure that we can cut our dependency on Russian imports and as well do not create other dependencies on imports from other countries. So I think that's a bit the spirit, and I think nowadays is very relevant to implement it and push it forward.
Paula, on this energy efficiency first principle, we know that the short-term goals of the Repower EU strategy very much emphasizes the urgency of some new infrastructure, at least in the short term. Do we have time to do an assessment of energy efficiency possibilities before we move forward on building infrastructure, LNG import terminals? Is it something that will be nice in the future, but in the short term we're in an urgent situation in which there isn't time to assess that?
I wouldn't think that time is an issue here. It's really a question of mentality, and we were not used to even consider energy efficiency before taking any decision, be it in terms of infrastructure or energy security. So I think first and foremost is about even thinking of it. Is it, how could we bring it in, and what could be an energy efficient approach to whatever project? It will not stand on the way of if an additional LNG terminal is necessary, and we know that now we will need some, because you do not replace 150 billion cubic meters of Russian gas overnight without additional infrastructure. It will not be the energy efficiency first principle which will stand on the way, but it is simply very important to bring in that reflex before thinking of taking measures where so far it has been really overseen, overlooked, and where had we put it in the formula, we could have made better decisions and more future-proof decisions and more cost-efficient and energy-efficient decisions.
Oliver, when we're thinking about integrating this principle into policy decisions, building decisions, construction decisions, do we have the data for that analysis now to assess something so macro as should we build this pipeline, or is this group of buildings where the pipeline is going to go capable of a certain amount of savings that would make that unnecessary?
No, we definitely have that analysis almost at our hands. And it can be done, of course. We know that member states have already issued 3 versions of national renovation strategies where they have defined that potential on a macro level, so they know what the energy saving potential is in principle. The next question is then, where is it located geographically, in which city, in which urban quarter? That is the data which we don't have at hand readily, but in principle, the energy saving potential in the building sector is known. And so therefore the question whether we now build new fossil fuel supply infrastructure or whether we rather invest in energy saving is a straightforward one and can be quite easily answered. It should be efficiency first, though of course we now have the challenge that we basically want to cut pipelines which feed Europe with Russian gas. And we need to invest in LNG, floating LNG terminals to have that gas from other sources. But over the time horizon of a decade, we can definitely make sure that we invest in the saving and that these temporary gas supply infrastructure systems which we're now establishing are truly temporary and will be built back in a few years when we have delivered the energy saving potential.
Let's go to some questions we've received from the audience via Slido. So we have a question here. I think I'll put this, let me put this to Niels first, actually. So the question is from William Viri Alamos. How do we convince some member states, especially Eastern ones, to go further on energy efficiency when the current directive is already causing them problems? So Niels, when you talk to your colleagues from other parts of Europe in the parliament, what do you think can convince more skeptical legislators and legislatures to come along on this journey?
Okay, so I think that we need to both use stick and carrot in the sense that what you talked about in the beginning of the conversation, Paula mentioned it, that one reason why we're not living up to the current directive is that it's not really binding on a member state level. It's not even binding on an EU level. I think we should make the new directive certainly binding on an EU level as the European Commission has proposed, but I would also say it needs to be binding on a member state level so that each member state has a target that they are obliged to live up to. So it's not a choice whether they like it or not, but they have to do it. So that I think we need to be more strict than we have been before. Second, I think we have some, I recognize that some countries, they are in a different economic situation than other countries, that we have different opportunities and challenges. I think we've made an effort with the Recovery and Resilience Facility and other funds that we are pushing right now, such as the Social Climate Fund, to support some of these countries and some of the groups in the countries that find it difficult to make the investments because they are short on money, to say it in a simple way. We need to help each other. So these funds, the RRF, the Recovery and Resilience Fund, and also the Social Climate Fund, there is a redistribution mechanism in those funds in the sense that the rich countries pay more to the funds and receive less compared to the poorer countries, which is fair, I think. So we need to help each other in that sense. Then I think, lastly, that what I hear from some of my Eastern European colleagues is that they are concerned about the fossil fuel element in the directive. So, for example, when there's Article 8 in the directive, the energy savings obligations, that each member state needs to have an annual energy savings of 1.5% of the energy consumption, as in the Commission's proposal. What can be counted then as energy savings? Can it be counted that you go from one fossil fuel to another, that you make energy savings based on fossil fuels? No, that cannot be counted. And as far as I can hear, there are also other examples in the directive where the directive tries to phase out fossil fuels. I think that's a good proposal. I support that. But what I can hear from some of my Eastern European colleagues is that they think that that is too drastic. And of course, that is part of the discussions. I think we should, as much as we can, stick to the proposal actually from the Commission that we need to phase out these fossil fuels. But I can hear that that's been taken up in the discussion by some of my Eastern colleagues, and we will of course have to discuss that.
Paula, we know that there's a reason the original directive wasn't made binding, and that's because it was opposed by certain member states, largely from the East. How this time around are you going to convince that part of the Council that a binding target is needed, at least at European level, maybe even at national level?
It's clear we have 27 member states, all in very different stages, right? Some with already a very, very high level of energy efficiency in the whole energy system, and others still lagging behind. And this is the challenge and the beauty at the same time of any proposal for legislation, where you really have to bring together and in the end land on a compromise which is hopefully ambitious, which brings us forward, but it's also feasible. And the way we've tried to strike this balance is really between finding the concrete target, the obligation, it has been mentioned already, the savings obligation, a very clear target for each member state, which needs to deliver a number of savings per year, but then leave the flexibility on how to achieve. With some exceptions, because we are saying, and this is an example where indeed the Commission proposal was strict, saying, but mind you, we will not be counting any savings if we're just going from coal to a gas or a gas-based fossil boiler, for instance. These savings will not be counted. And this is an example where indeed it's been strict. And we know that it will be for some easier than for others to achieve. And that's where indeed in the co-decision, in the discussion between the European Parliament and the European Council, we'll find that fine balance. But from the outset, the approach is combine a strict target, but then leave the flexibility to cater for the different stages of development and different stages of where member states are, in this case, in their energy efficiency, to be able to actually deliver on it.
Ariana, how would you convince reluctant member states that this is an important and worthwhile endeavor?
Well, I mean, I'm an optimistic by nature, and I would say that I would hope to see a change in perspective on energy efficiency considering the geopolitical context, and I would hope to see member states going much farther to what they would have accepted only a few months ago, because they really are now convinced about the need of saving energies. If that don't happen, I mean, the financing, as has been already mentioned by Niels, but I think that's a fair point. The Next Generation EU with the Recovery and Resilience Facility has clearly dedicated financing for energy efficiency, especially that can be used by public authorities, also for building renovations. So I think there is a new financial framework that could help member states going further. What could also help is also considering additional technical assistance to really ensure that local authorities on the ground are helped by creating a good pipeline of energy efficiency projects that can be well financed and that can be delivered. And finally, I think to go back to the change of perspective that Paula mentioned before, it's really an idea of really understanding and quantify, also from a monetary perspective, what are the additional multiple benefits that energy savings can bring. And it's not just saving energy to reduce consumption as its own goal, but it's saving energy to reduce emissions, to improve health of citizens, to improve comfort, to reduce energy poverty. So energy efficiency as such can really deliver on multiple objectives that are useful for member states' policy. And I think that's what maybe the energy efficiency community needs to do more, really to be able to present those benefits that goes with higher ambition and with associated stringent legislation.
You mentioned technical assistance. Quick follow-up question for you, Paula, from Slido as well. Someone asks, is there any technical assistance foreseen to help countries implement the directive, especially Eastern ones?
Absolutely, there is technical assistance, and I wouldn't say especially, but to all those who so require. And there are several programs from Elena, who has also already delivered very, very concrete results and benefits. So we absolutely see this. I mean, it needs to come together. Legislation alone doesn't make it, doesn't make the full-fledged impact. You need to combine it with the technical assistance, with the financing, with the information and awareness raising. Well, within the Commission, there's even now a dedicated service, the UG Reform, which is precisely aimed at providing technical assistance on different fronts, not just energy efficiency, to member states who so require. So this should not stand on the way, indeed.
Okay, question here for Niels comes from Joel. Oudenaarde. Can the Energy Efficiency Directive address all aspects of improving energy efficiency? For example, the role that the water-energy nexus, the relationship between water savings and energy savings, can play in reaching not only energy savings targets, but also in the process of decarbonization?
Well, that's a good question. I think the Energy Efficiency Directive sets some overall targets for how much we should save the energy consumption, and then member states will have to use their room for maneuver to figure out how should we live up to that? Could that be by making an effort focusing on water, or should we insulate more buildings, or should we use more excess heat from data centers? How should we do it? So the Energy Efficiency Directive puts some overall targets out there, and as indeed, as Paula also mentioned, some measures, some specific measures on some areas. There's not a specific part of it concentrating on water, but that could be one element that member states could focus on to improve energy efficiency. And then I think we have other legislation focusing more on water.
Oliver, could this water-energy nexus be something that's measured in terms of energy efficiency labels for buildings, energy efficiency ratings for buildings?
Well, I mean, we have a number of, in addition to the legally required energy performance certificates, we have a number of voluntary certification schemes for buildings in Europe, which take other things, other environmental factors into account, water consumption, for example, but also sustainability of building materials. I think we have that in place in a voluntary certification market. I'm not sure whether we need to have specific EU legislation which creates that nexus, because I think buildings which are designed today have this nexus built in already by design, at least 99% of the buildings. And when you renovate a building, these are topics which are, of course, looked at as well. The question is always, for me, what service should the building provide to the owner, the occupant, the tenant, and how do we meet the needs? Ariana mentioned multiple benefits of energy efficiency, which is quite a technical term for something which every building occupant actually feels when they live or enter a building. Is the ventilation good? Is the daylight availability good? Does it create a good atmosphere because the building is designed in the right way? And all these things have an impact on the energy consumption of a building and on the energy efficiency performance. And if all that is optimized, then we have ideal buildings which are meeting environmental and climate change goals and meet the needs of the people. So we need to not forget that buildings serve a purpose for society, for individuals. And if we combine the environmental and the climate change and the energy goals with those individual goals, then I think we will also overcome the investment barriers which might be there, but it requires that also the construction industry is actually able to provide that service in a convincing and reliable way with performance guarantees, ideally, and in an affordable way. So I mentioned earlier this need to change the market, to change the renovation market. And I think that is something which can only to a limited degree be done by legislation. EU legislation can design the enabling framework, but we really need the innovation in the market to be delivered also by the construction industry. I think that's very, very important.
Paul, do you agree that this energy-water nexus is already incorporated into most modern buildings? And how would you say that the construction industry can kind of grasp the metal on this and explain it to consumers, make it more understandable?
Just come back 1 second to what I said before. The connection between the energy issues and the environmental issues is already there right now at regulatory level. The regulation I mentioned, his nickname is taxonomy, the dangerous word to pronounce. So we have to follow that. So I think it's a natural connection, definitely. And to tell about the acceptance of the people, I think the interesting point, maybe not on water, but I had it on energy. I have to tell you the stories about the smart meters. At the beginning of the smart meters, sometimes people would smash them because they did not want to see some sort of control of their energy consumption. In situations where it was provided with the building, of course, they had not the initiative to use it. Or sometimes they didn't want us to get the data, to manage the data. So we had to organize meetings at the bar of the district, the neighborhood, to discuss. So there was an acceptance process with the people, which was, it's a French friend of mine who told me we had to discuss around a good Belgian beer to agree that the data from the smart meters would be collectible and we could discuss it. The water issue is a bit the same thing. It's in the rules. You know, it's even in taxonomy. It's how much your tap, how much your flush has to be. It's already in the system. Sometimes you don't have to discuss everything. Sometimes it's already there and you use it, and you don't have to ask questions necessarily about it. But water is important, and as I said, the circular economy, the pollution control, and the biodiversity of a district. We should not forget that we have not talked about the development at neighborhood level, at district level. It's important when we work on a district, we speak from the beginning with the people, with the authorities, with the architects, with the investors. All the actors of the development of a new district have to be brought together from the beginning. That's also very important.
So we have one last question for Ariana. It goes back to something you said before. So the question is from Christian Morelli from CINEA. Christian says, energy forecasts are hard to predict. Ariana, can you be more specific on the type of future-proof directive you would like to see the Commission produce?
Well, I can be very specific as well in terms of energy projection. I mean, of course, in the Repower EU, the European Commission has proposed a higher target for energy efficiency, meaning a cut of 13% of energy use compared to the Prime's 2020 projections. I mean, as a coalition for energy savings, we would like to see a much higher reduction cut, and we are really supportive of the proposal made by the rapporteur here to cut energy use by 2030 at least 19%. Compared to Prime's 2020. It also means that with the rise in energy prices, actually what was cost effective before, there is a big potential of measures that are becoming most cost effective, and so it means that this ambition level can be reduced. So I mean, to cut along short, we need to reduce energy consumption at this highest level possible to ensure that climate neutrality is achieved and that energy efficiency and energy savings measures are the backbone of this climate neutrality and decarbonization.
Great. Well, certainly a lot to think about here as we move forward with this. I think definitely we've established, though, that this is really a fundamental part of the Repower EU plan and responding to the current challenges that we face, both in terms of energy prices and in terms of the security challenges that we face. So we want to thank the panelists for some excellent comments and the audience for some great questions. About a round of applause for them.
And to the moderator.
And that's it for this panel. Thanks for following along. And the next panel coming up in this room, I will tell you in just a moment.
Market design.
Market design coming up right away, just in a couple minutes. Thanks.
Great.